Welcome to the Empathy Avengers podcast, where we put empathy into action.
Welcome, everyone, to the Empathy Avengers podcast. Today we have Eric Mosley with us. Eric is a veteran, career pilot, a union worker, counselor, and an activist. Thanks for being here with us, Eric.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. We're excited to get into stuff with you today. So why don't you elaborate from what Mindy shared with your bio?
Okay, so my birthday was actually yesterday. I was born in
Day.
Thank you. So 71. I grew up on the west side of Columbus, Ohio. My dad was in law enforcement. My mom was a home ec teacher. 50s and 60s, it was a segregated white neighborhood, which I didn't know that at the time. I went to Ohio State and was in ROTC in high school and college. Got married in college. Went in the Navy when I graduated. Was on active duty for 8 years. Got out when I was 30. Went to work for an airline, Northwest Airlines in Minnesota. We had 2 kids who are both adults now and in their 40s. We live in Southwest Virginia now. I went to graduate school at Virginia Tech, got my graduate degree in counselor education there. Did some volunteer work with family service and the Roanoke sex offender program and in the prison system for a while. And retired right before COVID, thank goodness. Became an activist. I grew up thinking conservatively, identifying with the Republican Party and thinking that I was conservatively aligned. Reagan was president when I was in the military on active duty. When I got off active duty and became a union member and started studying union history, I've never voted Republican since. So basically, I've been an independent since then. In the George W. Bush years, that's when I became an activist. My son went to 2 wars. My son-in-law went to 1. My wife and I did a 9-month-long Catholic social justice class. It was a big transition period for me. I would say my worldview really flipped during that period. I started anti-war protesting, climate change protesting. That was around the era of Citizens United. I protested at the Supreme Court about that and campaigned for Obama. Occupy Wall Street happened, and I was 100% on board with those people. That was after the subprime crisis, the '07 collapse, and right about the time President Obama became president for his first term. What's crazy to me now is that people that vote this year in Virginia were born when that was happening. But they don't remember any of that. Things that I remember, like the Vietnam War and Desert Storm and NAFTA and the subprime crisis. And those are things a lot of people do not remember. It's an interesting thing to talk to people and then just think about where people are coming from and realizing that things that seem like yesterday to me happened before. They're like World War II to other people. To me, I was born 9 years after the end of World War II. So people that were born after 9/11, after the subprime crisis, those things are history to them.
I think generational perspective is basically what you're talking about. And having lived through different experiences, and I can definitely remember all those events, almost all of them. As I'm getting older, I keep thinking back and how maybe more resilient I am because I've weathered through adversity, and how I'm optimistic about getting through this current adversity because I have heard perspective, and I have, even from events that happened before I was born, that knowledge of historical perspective of things that makes me more worried perhaps about what's going on. Another thing that I feel that I've been developing and continue to develop is my empathy from more of a racial or a different background, different economic background, and different upbringing. That is another way that we can learn about other people and share in understanding and just loving thy neighbor. The generational thing is key because of course here we are all mostly older folks, but it's the wisdom, right? We have wisdom because we're older, on the older side of the spectrum, compared to the younger folks who maybe they haven't had the world experiences to really fully appreciate their own perspective, whereas we maybe can ourselves.
I'm extremely curious. I read I study things, and because I try to understand why things happen, why people make the choices they do. One of my introductory classes is like, why are you here? Everyone else is basically, I want to save the world. I want to help children. I want to help victims of domestic violence. I want to help whatever it was, right? I was just there to figure myself out. And okay, then I'll help other people too, but I don't see how I can help someone unless I know myself and I really understand myself.
Something I've heard said a lot is you have to put on your oxygen mask first before you can help anybody else. And that
100%.
kind of does play into our discussion about empathy too. If we're falling apart in an emergency or a situation, that's not helping anybody else around us.
Yes.
I think you're right. Getting ourselves together first is key.
I got my first airplane ride when I was 4 years old. My dad was a private pilot. During World War II, he had gone into the Army under a program to get pilot training. He entered the service in 1944, I think, and then the war ended right before he was supposed to start pilot training. So he never got trained as a pilot. Carl Jung said the biggest burdens we have are the unrealized dreams of our parents. I don't know if that's true, but I certainly ended up becoming a pilot.
You said you were training even as a child, but did you learn to fly in the military? Was that your role?
I started taking flying lessons when I was 14. Back in those days, I had a paper route and I wanted a motorcycle. And my dad was afraid of me having a motorcycle. He rightfully, as I proved later in life. But he said, you could take flying lessons. And I'm like, really? So I did solo on my 16th birthday, which was the deal. Got my private license at 17 before I graduated from high school. And that helped me get a ROTC scholarship. I also ended up going to officer candidate school in the Navy. I rolled from officer candidate school right into pilot training, got commissioned. That was in 76. When I was growing up, that dream to be a pilot, I'm a romantic in many ways and an idealist in many ways, as well as being curious. I ended up flying single seat fighter bombers. So I got to do what I wanted, but it meant a lot of time away from home. In 1979, when the Iranian Revolution happened, I was on port call in Africa. We were the first aircraft carrier to be off the coast of Iran after the Iranian revolutionaries had captured the U.S. embassy and taken hostages. So we can talk about presidential truth telling or the lack thereof. President Carter is telling the American public, we're not planning to go to war. Meanwhile, I was engaged in war planning. I spent 6 months away from home at that period of time. And when I went home, my son didn't know who I was. That just broke my heart. That ended my naval career. I was in for a few more years, but I was done at that moment. I never wanted to be an airline pilot. That's like going from Formula One to driving a bus. And so it was not what I wanted. Part of why I ended up graduate school, I ended up on a real search for meaningfulness and trying to find my way. So curiosity and trying to figure my life out at that for a long time. I'm 70, so I guess I can't claim to still be in my midlife crisis, but it was lengthy.
Right on. Thanks for the warning.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of it for sure. But I feel like our country's in the middle of it at this point.
100%. Yeah, I think our country is in full-fledged adolescence. And unfortunately, adolescent masculinity is dominant and it's not healthy.
What was the difference between commanding respect and earning trust through genuine care?
Oh my God. The military does a highly inadequate job of teaching leadership. So it's a lot of on-the-job training. They throw you in. My experience with guys that went to Naval Academy or West Point or the Air Force Academy is they think they know how to lead, but they are sadly mistaken. What they know how to do is order people around. Most of them probably never even heard the word empathy in school. I would say the military did not teach leadership. It taught patriarchy. It taught hierarchy, a hierarchical model of dominance. Back to my curiosity. This is empathy, right? Trying to understand where someone else is coming from. I did a bunch of training in nonviolent communication, and that was really one of the places, even beyond graduate school, because graduate school and counselor education didn't focus so much on empathy. Like the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual got a whole semester, but empathy? I mean, I don't even know if we really even spent any time at all talking about it.
I think it boils down to how diverse the community is in your upbringing and maybe what type of exposure even your parents had to diversity and people that were different. Because I was very lucky. I'm a white woman, middle class, but my parents were very progressive and empathetic, and they were not hippies. They were like churchgoers, but they really embodied the Jesus kind of mantras of love thy neighbor and stuff. And so I don't recognize this religious rite. I don't recognize that at all. I remember when I was like 6, she was mortified because we were in a more white community. My dad was a Methodist minister, and there was this Japanese couple that showed up one day, and part of his job was to welcome the new people, of course. So he had shaken their hands as they left the church. And my brother, who's a little bit older than me, so he was probably maybe 8 at the time. So he made a comment that, like, kind of harmless, but he said, well, why don't they find their own church? Because everybody else was white in this neighborhood or in the community. And it is true that there were Asian churches that we would drive by and talk about. My mom was like freaked out and she said, oh my God, we have to move to a more diverse community. And at that same time, my dad had his midlife crisis, so he left the ministry and went back to law. A lot of those things happened at the same time. But
Yes.
it was really important if you are brought up in a one-dimensional kind of community and then you go to college or you get a job somewhere and all of a sudden exposed, or you're in the military, right? And maybe in the military it's the opposite. You might be empathetic and then you go to the military and that's all patriarchy. I do think it has to do a lot with what you've been brought up. You got to give your parents a lot of credit and the community that you're in and the experiences that you have.
I worked at a Holiday Inn restaurant as a busboy. One of our coworkers is a black man, young man, black kid like us. At that point, there were no black kids in my school. Hanging out with a young black guy just felt, I don't remember thinking it was weird. He was a friend of my friend and we became friends. The Vietnam War was kind of the same thing. I saw anti-war protesters and I'm just like, I don't really understand that because of wanting to be a military pilot and having read a bunch of romanticized, idealized crap about what war was like. But believing it, spent a lot of time studying psychology and different religious traditions. I didn't realize how much fundamental Christianity was a part of my social framework that I grew up in because my dad was an atheist. He was an atheist because when I was a year and a half old, my parents' second child, their second son was born. He was born prematurely. My dad carried him to the nursery and he died a few hours later. And because my dad's, I think the religion said because that child wasn't baptized, he was going to hell. My dad goes, fuck that, and became an atheist. My mom's dad was a minister in the Church of God, which is fairly fundamentalist. There was a dynamic, the attention dynamic there, but I obviously identified more with my dad. He was a biologist, so he was very science oriented. I was never baptized as a kid. Then I married a Catholic.
You said there was a social justice class for Catholics that helped you both move into the social justice realm.
Yes, definitely. That was one of the more important things I've ever done in my life. I really believe in the New Testament teachings of Jesus. I don't go to the Jesus as God part. I respect people that follow Jesus and have the more divine aspect of that. That's fine. That's totally cool. The Christian nationalism is not Christianity. 100% the opposite.
Great.
I was reading Leonardo Boff, one of the founders of liberation theology, when I was doing this social justice. Why it is exactly why Opus Dei and J.D. Vance and those people, they hate that stuff. They hate liberation theology because that's power to the people. It is the antithesis of what they believe in and stand for. They stand for top-down oppression, hierarchy, authoritarianism. My interpretation is Jesus was 100% against that shit.
You had said you got into the whole psyop stuff, and I think the question that prompted that was, what does empathy mean to you?
I love words and language. even though English is my only language. Etymology, the roots of where do words come from? What do they mean? How did they evolve? And the meaning of the word evolve. That stuff fascinates me. Empathy was coined around the early 1900s. And what the word meant then, it has changed. So I spend time looking at words and trying to sort it out. So with empathy, what about that same time too? Glenn Beck, he said empathy is what enabled Hitler to understand Jews so that he could oppress and murder them. A lot of people say empathy is the golden rule. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. I say, no, that is not empathy either. Some people would say, let's walk a mile in their shoes. Nope, wrong. In my view, that's wrong. In my view, empathy is being in touch with your own emotional self, right? When someone else goes into their pain, you don't go with them, but you know that pain from your own inner investigation, your own inner journey. So you know what that pain is and you can relate to it, but you don't follow them into it. Instead, instead of walking a mile in their shoes, you walk a mile with them while they're in their shoes and learn from them what it's like to be them. That's empathy. It is having the emotional connection which a sociopath couldn't have. He might have understood them. He understood their vulnerabilities and how to take advantage of them. Again, that is not empathy. Empathy is understanding someone else's emotional journey because you've done the journey too. And so you're learning like what the Palestinians are going through, what the Muslims in India have suffered. I've never had to experience that and hopefully won't, but I learned from them, right? I can learn from them what that's like, and I can empathize with that to the extent that my emotional awareness and emotional maturity and inner connection with my own emotional self, I can touch that. That to me is empathy.
What a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Don't laugh, Mindy. But I once took an acting class because I'm a director, filmmaker, and I was trying to learn how to talk to actors. And it's a lot harder than you would ever imagine. And part of it is that they were teaching the actors to fully give themselves a full backstory for the character and to fully appreciate what and to try to come up with, if you had to get emotional and cry or something, to go into your own experience and come up with some horrible thing like remember when your mom died or whatever when you were 5. And that's why actors get a lot of kudos and they make a lot of money because the best ones are able to fully experience those emotions and to even play a serial killer. They actually have to get into the head of those people. So, in that sense, empathy is a little bit like we're all trying to act a little bit in that sense, and we're trying to fully put our frame of mind in where the other person, like what their walk in their shoes and what their experiences might have been.
Right. So the current political context, have you read Arlie Hochschild's books?
I
No.
haven't.
Okay, so Arlie Hochschild is a sociologist. She's a professor emeritus from UC Berkeley. During the Tea Party years, she wrote a book called Strangers in Their Own Land. More recently, she did a book about MAGA people, and that one is called Stolen Pride. The premise that she came from was, I do not understand hardcore conservative voters. They seem to me to be doing harm to themselves. I don't understand that, but I want to understand it. She talks about what she calls an empathy wall. The empathy wall is here's the right and here's the left. And over here on the left, we can empathize with people in our group, and conservatives over here, they can empathize with people in their group. But there's this wall that prevents empathy from getting through to either side, right? And
Yeah.
so she wanted to bridge the empathy, what she saw as an empathy wall. I thought that was a beautiful description a little over 2 years ago as we're watching the Biden presidency start to wind down and the campaign pick up, and we see Trump's going to be the challenger. I wanted to understand politics in a way that I did not. So I picked up a book on political philosophy and started reading the history of political philosophy. This book goes back to ancient Greece, pre-Socrates, and really starts with Plato. because Socrates didn't leave a written record, but Plato did. So it starts from there and then comes up to modern times. I love history. I love context. I want to understand MAGA didn't just come out of nowhere. Neither did the Tea Party, right? And Trump didn't come out of nowhere. And even Ronald Reagan didn't come out of nowhere. These things have history. They have roots. And if you don't understand the roots, it's like empathy, really, having empathy to get to understand the context of what's happening now. You've got to get to the roots. And the roots for us really go back to that far, to Greece, ancient Greece. Anyway, Hochschild, he gives a wonderful example of what it is like to approach people with that open heart, open mind. And I think that's what empathy is. It's having an open heart and an open mind, not empty, right? But open to learning, open to having that curiosity. I did a lot of union work. It really was the American political system in microcosm. And I would talk to elected representatives about voting on certain issues, and I would think we were in alignment. And then they would vote the opposite way. And it's like, what just happened? Well, what just happened was they lied to me about where their true interests were. They were dishonest with me about what their goals were, what their real intentions were. And frequently, their intention was to secure more political power to themselves, not to do what was best for the pilot group. I did not see how I could do what I was doing. The only moral choice was to do the best I could for the whole pilot group. It wasn't necessarily the best thing in each moment for each group, but we thought of it as trying to jacking up the house one corner at a time.
John F. Kennedy said, a rising tide lifts all boats. So
Yes.
Yeah, the whole pilot group would come along with you.
Yes. When people say MAGA voters are voting against themselves, I want to say, did you vote for Bill Clinton? Yes, I'm a Democrat. Then why did you vote against yourself? Because he was a frickin' neoliberal, and that was not good for you. And if you're a working class person, NAFTA, that was not good for you. So why did you vote against your self-interest? I voted for Reagan twice. And then when I found out, neoliberal is dismantling unions and Clinton continued it, I voted against myself, but I did not think I was. And that's, I would say, true of people that voted for Bill Clinton. They didn't think he was going to hurt them. They didn't think he was going to do things like repeal Glass-Steagall, which is what led directly to the subprime crisis. That's what Arlie Hochschild really gets into, is why Tea Party voters and then later MAGA voters, what's their framework of understanding? And that's the empathy. You're in line to achieve the American dream. This is Hochschild saying to Tea Party, later MAGA, you're in line to achieve the dream. And they went, that's it, except that the government is using our tax money to screw us over, right? To do the things that cost us our jobs. And that's how they saw liberals and Democrats, big government and labor unions as not on their side.
The Reagan Democrats, right?
Yes, I would say so. The people that believe that trickle down actually works, they don't see that it's actually a fire hose up, stealing from them, robbing from them to enrich the already rich. Money, Lies, and God also is a brilliant book, expose of the framework and the disinformation. The right has a brilliant understanding of human psychology. Most people understand that propaganda works, but most people think that knowing that propaganda works means that it doesn't work on you. That's research, right? And it's wrong. In fact, it makes you more vulnerable to it working on you. If you think it doesn't work on you, because it works on all of us.
I get that question quite a lot because I survived 2 cults. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness and got out at 18. And then my church in Texas for 15 years turned into a QAnon church.
Yes.
So having the cult experiences, people are like, well, you should have known better. You would have never gotten into QAnon if you had that experience as a kid. But it makes you more vulnerable to the machinations of the leadership to manipulate us.
Yes. I just listened to a brilliant podcast the other day on adult grooming, how people are brought in to stick relationships. Con artists are very good at coming across as caring, believable, empathetic people when they're not. They're sociopaths, but they get it and they know how to manipulate people.
Alexa, on our podcast episode, taught us about dark empathy and that the narcissist or the psychopaths is just all in it for themselves. And the other one is so manipulative that they manipulate your empathy against you or whatever for their own benefit. Crazy.
Yes, it is crazy. In the book Money, Lies, and God by Katherine Stewart, which is a brilliant, brilliant book. This is my military background. I think in terms of battlefields, I think in those terms, strategy, three features of a successful movement. One of those three things is strategic planning. So if you want to plan strategically, you have to understand the battlefield, right? And Money, Lies, and God. It is the best expose of the battlefield that I've seen, and it's daunting. So if you haven't read the book, read the introduction, then go to the last chapter, because otherwise, Money, Lies, and God can take you down that sort of soul-crushing defeatism. So read the introduction. She gives a really good framework. Then go to the last chapter because she does the brilliant thing that so many authors fail to do, which is a way forward. Here's the way forward. Fabulous book that every person who is fighting back against MAGA, against Trump, against authoritarianism, whatever you want to call it, needs to read that book.
Sounds good. We just celebrated Independence Day, and I was kind of disheartened by that, but I still love the American flag, and I consider myself a patriot. But like the American flag and the word patriot have been kind of hijacked lately, and I just wondered, with your military perspective and being a veteran, like what are your thoughts on that?
100%, 100%. So I read a book. Everything goes back to books. One of the books that I really am glad was written, and it's fairly small, is The Political Philosophy of James Madison. And James Madison, as I'm sure every American probably knows, was the primary author of our Constitution. I grew up thinking I was a conservative. I grew up aligned with the Republican Party in those days, in the 70s and 80s. When I realized what they really stood for, I began to loathe them. George W. Bush era. That's when I began to loathe the Republican Party. My son said to me, I get it. You got dumped by your first love. I don't totally buy that. Maybe. The second time we had a conversation about this was maybe a month ago. And we were talking about this same topic. What do you think America stands for? What is it? What does that mean? And what I came to realize is that I grew up with a certain belief about America. And that belief was that America stood for liberty and justice for all. It's the Pledge of Allegiance. Said it every frickin' day in class. Under God part, not so much. That was never really sank in so much for me, but liberty and justice for all. And then of, by, and for the people. I believed that. Lincoln from the Gettysburg Address. And I believed the part that we were the shining city on a hill and that we stood for democracy and freedom and justice, liberty and justice for all. There's another book that is a really, really hard read for an American. It's called Killing Hope. Came out in the Bush years. Subtitle, American Military and CIA Interventions Since World War II. And if you want to hate America, there's a good place to start. Now, I don't hate America because I really do think America did stand for the things I believed in. But when I came to realize that it didn't, and talking about this with my son, I cried. I mean, I really cried. I had this childhood vision of what the military was, of what America stood for. And then you read about things like School of the Americas at Fort Benning and how we trained the people that became the Taliban. We overthrew a budding democracy in Iran and installed a puppet dictator. And we did that all throughout Latin America. You could look at America and say that's what America stands for. And certainly America did those things. And you cannot reconcile the two. America has those aspects. And if you go back into the history and understand political philosophy, James Madison was a rich white slave owner, white male slave owner. The guys that did most of the dying in the Revolutionary War were not rich. They were white and they were male, but they were not rich. And when the Constitution was signed, the people that did most of the dying did not have the right to vote. I don't think that's what they died for. I'm reading a historian named Tad Stormer. He says that deified false image that we have of the founders of our country came from the guy that founded the U.S. Naval Academy, who wrote a 7-volume set of books that glorified and deified the founders of the country. And that is the imaginary history that I was taught, that I grew up with, and that I believed in. And it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. And we shouldn't have realized it was bullshit because they're just human beings. They're just like us, like we would have been 250 years ago. And if you look at the Constitution and realize that all it did was we rejected the British aristocracy for a colonial aristocracy, rich white men. What we're seeing now is the original interpretation of our Constitution being put into practice. Rich, mostly white, mostly men who are now getting control of everything.
Yeah, make America great again.
They're doing so without any empathy included in it.
No, and I will say it's because they're afraid. It is a fear-driven, like Trump's a bully. He's an authoritarian, sure. But number one thing, if you were on a schoolyard with Trump as a kid, he's the one that was going to bring his thugs around and threaten other kids, right? Take their lunch money. Because he's been rich his whole life, he's been able to avoid being held responsible, right? Mm-hmm. What drives Trump is being brutalized by his father, right? And so he was afraid of his dad. The biggest bullies are the most scared, and that they are so scared, the billionaires who have used their wealth, gain power to bully the rest of us through MAGA, through Christian nationalism, through the lies, lying, the cheating, the stealing, the corrupting of our government. It's corporatization. And I would say Bezos and Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are perfect examples of, it appears to me that the richer you are, the more fearful you become, right? Because you're afraid somebody's going to take your riches away. And to be honest, to be fair to them, they should be scared because what they did is wrong. It's immoral. It's unjust. And we should take their money away from them. Not to harm them or kill them, but to disempower their sociopathic bullshit. As a military veteran, I believe in liberty and justice for all. I believe that's what our flag stands for. I quit organizing after Obama got reelected. I was trying to organize people like me, white people, right? And you couldn't get white people to show up for shit. It was because I was trying to organize people who, like me, thought they were middle class, didn't see themselves as working class. They saw working class as being high school or less. And that, but I'm a white collar worker. That makes me middle class. Nope, sorry, that was wrong. That was a bad interpretation, and we're paying a price for it now. It's what allowed us to let the Democratic Party throw the working class, the so-called blue collar workers, throw them under the bus, to just walk away from rural America and go, don't need them. Yeah, you do. Yeah, we do. Because when the Democrats threw them under the bus and we let them do it, we screwed ourselves. So I hate the Democratic Party almost as much as I hate the Republican Party for being corrupt, being disingenuous, for lying, cheating, stealing, for preventing third parties that really represent people from, like Working Families Party, crushing them down. If all you can do is talk about Trump, which is all the media has done since 2015. They focus on him. They talk about him. They talk about his policies. Trump, MAGA, Tea Party. Okay, I get it. I get it. Stop talking about it because I get it. I want that last chapter in Katherine Stewart's book. What's the way forward? And those good-hearted, well-meaning, well-intended journalists can't help themselves from focusing on the train wreck, and they don't talk about the solution. And that drives me insane. So I asked people when I started organizing again, I get what we're against. We're against the authoritarians, the fascists, the MAGA, whatever you want to call them, the bullies, the bully billionaires. I get what we're against. Maybe you could tell me what we're against in 3 words. To me, it is unrestrained accumulation of wealth. What are we fighting for? Democracy? Liberty and justice for all? Freedom? I like freedom. Liberty and justice for all is for me. Most people do not know. For a while, I was thinking it was democracy. I don't think that's it. Democracy is a tool. It's a tactic. Strategically thinking, what are we fighting for? And that, I think, that is the question. And I think what we're fighting for is enlightened liberalism. And if I may, I'm going to read you from thing that I just read on Substack yesterday that I think is incredibly brilliant.
Sure.
Liberalism begins with a simple but revolutionary recognition. Human beings are fallible. Disagreement is inevitable, and yet we must somehow organize society together. This is, if philosophy is, how do you live a good life? Political philosophy is, how do we live a good life together? That's the importance of political philosophy. How do we organize society together? Every other political philosophy tries to solve this problem by eliminating it. That's authoritarianism. You crush dissent. You demand obedience. Right? You try to make the problem of how are we going to live together go away. It's not a problem because we're going to live the way I tell everyone. This is liberalism's genius. It doesn't require consensus on ultimate values to create functional societies. It provides a framework for collective reasoning that allows people with fundamentally different worldviews to cooperate, compete, and even change their minds through peaceful means. That's what I think we're fighting for.
Awesome.
That is a perfect ending right there.
I agree. Thank you, Eric. Really great.
There's nothing more important than this.
You're right. Eric, thank you so much for this conversation. You've added about 5 or 6 books to my to-be-read list, and I've really enjoyed it so much. Thank you for joining us on the Empathy Avengers podcast, everyone, where kindness is your superpower and empathy saves the day.
The Empathy Avengers, where we put empathy into action.